World War II, The Path to Allied Victory, Part 2. In the first episode of our World War II series, we saw how Germany and the Soviet Union invaded and divided Poland to consolidate their power. Hitler proposed an alliance to Soviet leader Stalin, but negotiations failed. Enraged, Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union. With his brilliant military strategy, Hitler quickly gained the upper hand and captured much of Western Soviet territory. After the first phase of the battle, the Soviet Union was in a precarious situation. What would Stalin do to save his country from this dire predicament? The Soviet counteroffensive. After capturing Kiev, Hitler mobilized nearly all available forces and armor from the northern and southern fronts, as well as from German-occupied territories, to centralize and prepare for the destruction of Moscow and the subjugation of the Soviet Union. For the Soviet Union, this was a historic moment. Never had the USSR faced such a critical situation since its founding. Nearly all its key economic centers were under German control. Supplies and weapons from the Allies had not yet arrived, and new troops had not been mobilized to replace those lost in battle. The Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse. Stalin called upon the people of Moscow to support the military in the defense effort. Workers, engineers, doctors, professors, and artists all became warriors. They erected dense defensive lines around the borders of Moscow. With 1.2 million Soviet troops against 1.9 million German troops, and with the Germans having superior tactics and weaponry, the situation looked grim. But the Soviets were determined to defend their homeland. Phase 2, the Battle for Moscow. On September 30th, 1941, the second phase of the battle between Germany and the Soviet Union began. In the first attack wave, Hitler led a powerful force of tanks and armored divisions straight toward Moscow. The German advance was swift, but as they moved deeper into Soviet territory, they encountered fierce resistance. The Soviet troops fought with tenacity, using every available resource. The German tank divisions slowed as they faced relentless Soviet counterattacks. In the first 10 days of this phase, the Germans decimated the initial Soviet defenses. Soviet troop numbers dwindled from 1.2 million to just 600,000, and the Germans were only 200 kilometers from Moscow. The end of the first attack wave left the Soviet Union in a critical state. Soviet preparations. The Soviet Union consolidated its remaining forces from other defensive regions to brace for the second German attack. Civilians in Moscow, including women and teenagers, joined the effort, digging anti-tank trenches and providing medical aid. They were ready to fight to the last drop of blood. Stalin questioned his subordinates about the chances of holding Moscow. The chilling winter was approaching, and although the Soviets had suffered heavy losses, they had also inflicted significant damage on the Germans. The second attack wave. On October 14, 1941, Hitler launched the second attack on Moscow, advancing from 3 directions: the north, center, and south. In the north, German forces quickly breached the first Soviet defense line, but Soviet reinforcements created a stalemate. In the south, the Soviets deployed their new T-34 tanks, which outperformed German armor and inflicted heavy losses. In the center, the main battlefield, both sides committed their largest forces. The Soviets fought desperately with everything they had, from grenades to Molotov cocktails. The intense Soviet resistance caused heavy casualties among the German troops. The second German attack wave only gained 50 kilometers, far less progress than the first wave. As winter set in, the cold weather severely hampered the German advance. The third attack wave. On November 15, 1941, the third German attack began. Severe cold and heavy snow made the advance difficult. The Soviets had fortified the central front with extensive minefields and anti-tank obstacles, bringing the German advance to a halt just 25 kilometers from Moscow. In the north and south, the Germans were also pushed back. German defeat at Moscow. The harsh winter drastically reduced the German army's effectiveness. The Soviets launched counterattacks, driving the Germans back from Moscow. Although the Soviets successfully defended Moscow and lifted the siege of surrounding cities, they were not yet strong enough to completely expel the Germans from their territory. For the first time, a German plan had failed after a series of victories. The second phase of the battle ended with the Soviets gaining the upper hand. The Pacific Theater. In Asia, Japan had seized Manchuria, Korea, and Indochina, aiming to dominate all of Asia. However, Japan needed more resources, especially oil, to fuel its ambitions. When the United States threatened an embargo, Japan decided to strike at Pearl Harbor to neutralize the American threat and secure resource-rich territories in Southeast Asia. The attack on Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, devastating the U.S. Pacific Fleet. This prompted the United States to declare war on Japan and join World War II. The U.S. began counterattacking Japanese forces across the Pacific, island by island. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 marked a turning point, with the U.S. sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, significantly weakening Japan's naval power. America's offensive. The United States continued its offensive, capturing Guadalcanal, Tarawa and Saipan, gaining control of the Pacific Ocean. Japan faced increasing difficulties and was isolated from its colonies. The war intensified as the US bombed Tokyo and other Japanese cities. The end of World War II. In Europe, Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, opening the Western Front and liberating France from German occupation. The Soviet Union pushed from the east, advancing into Berlin. On April 30, 1945, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker and Germany officially surrendered on May 8, 1945. Japan's surrender. After Germany's surrender, the US focused on Japan. On August 6, 1945, the US dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killing tens of thousands. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, another atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Faced with such devastation, Japan officially surrendered on August 15, 1945, ending World War II. The aftermath of war. World War II concluded with an Allied victory. The war claimed over 80 million lives and left a lasting impact on humanity. Post-war, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, dominating global affairs. They, along with other nations, established the United Nations to maintain world peace. However, ideological differences led to growing tensions between the US and the USSR, setting the stage for a new conflict known as the Cold War.